The night was heavy with rain, and the only sound that broke the silence of the small Texas town was the soft thudding of water against the sidewalks. Luca stood under the flickering street lamp outside his rented apartment, clutching a worn envelope close to his chest. Inside it was the sum of every sacrificed coffee, every missed birthday gift to himself, every overtime hour he had worked for 5 relentless years. To anyone else, it might have been just $4,000. To Luca, it was his future. A tiny, stubborn hope that he could someday open a flower shop where no one would question who he loved or why he smiled too much when arranging roses. When Jeremy pulled up in a battered old truck, drenched and frantic, Luca already knew something was wrong. Jeremy was the friend who had seen him through the worst, through the taunts, the sideways glances, the aching loneliness of being different in a town that barely tolerated it. So when Jeremy, voice shaking, begged for help because his mother was sick and the hospital bills were more than he could handle, Luca didn't hesitate. He barely heard the promises, the pledge to repay. In 6 months, the talk of loyalty, the clumsy insistence that Luca was family. None of it mattered. The envelope changed hands, and with it, so did a piece of Luca's soul. He watched Jeremy disappear into the night, the taillights dissolving into the mist, feeling the way hope sometimes feels. Not like a soaring thing, but like something quietly fragile handed over without a guarantee. In the days that followed, Luca threw himself back into work, delivering flower arrangements across dusty county lines, scrubbing counters at the coffee shop. Until his knuckles split, he told himself the money would come back. More importantly, he told himself he had done the right thing. After all, wasn't that what people like him were supposed to do? Be kind, be forgiving, earn their place in a town where masculinity was measured by how loudly you cheered at football games and how little you cried. Luca had learned early that being gentle meant being overlooked, but maybe, just maybe, being good would finally make him enough. The flower shop dream retreated into the corners of his mind, tucked between unopened bills and secondhand books. Every so often, he'd pass an empty storefront and imagine a splash of wildflowers against the dusty windows, a place that didn't care who he was or whom he loved. He let himself believe that someday, when the money came back, he would plant something permanent in this town that had never truly accepted him. But what Luca didn't know, standing there soaked to the bone with borrowed hope, was that some promises are never meant to be kept, and sometimes trusting the wrong person doesn't just cost you money, it costs you the faith you fought so hard to build. At HeartStories, we believe every story has a turning point. Stay with us to see where Luca's journey leads, and don't forget to subscribe if you believe in the power of second chances. Seasons changed, but Luca's hope clung stubbornly to the calendar. Every month that slipped by, he found a new reason to excuse Jeremy's silence. Maybe the bills had piled higher than expected. Maybe something had gone wrong at the bank. Maybe Jeremy was just waiting for the right moment to return what he had borrowed with so much urgency, so much trembling, sincerity. Luca told himself that real friendship wasn't measured by money, that patience was part of loyalty. He repeated these words like prayers each night as he pulled double shifts, wiping down coffee-stained counters. Long after the last customer left, in the back of his mind, he still held onto the image of a storefront with wide windows, blooms spilling out into the street, a life fully his own. It wasn't until the town's annual fall festival that the first crack appeared in the image he had built. He wasn't even planning to attend, too tired, too busy saving scraps of a dream. He wasn't sure he still had the right to dream, but an old co-worker begged him to come, insisting that everyone would be there, that it would be good for him to be seen, to be remembered. He showed up in a borrowed jacket holding a lukewarm cup of cider, weaving between booths strung with fairy lights. That's when he saw Jeremy standing in front of the local bank's new customer appreciation booth, laughing with the branch manager. Luca watched from a distance as Jeremy signed papers with a flourish, receiving a crisp packet of documents and a handshake full of congratulations. He looked whole, thriving. It wasn't jealousy that burned in Luca's chest, it was confusion. If Jeremy had the means to smile like that, to invest in his future, why hadn't he reached out? Why had Luca's messages gone unanswered? Each one swallowed by the silence that grew heavier with time. Later that evening, sitting alone at a picnic table, Luca overheard fragments of conversation from a nearby group. Jeremy's name floated through the air, along with words that stung sharper than any insult Luca had ever endured in his life. "He's smart," someone said, laughing. "Put the money in a savings account, bumped up his credit score. Said it wasn't worth paying off personal stuff right now. Priorities, right?" The words hit like stones. Luca gripped the edges of the bench, feeling the weight of every invisible expectation pressed against him for years. Be the bigger person, be the forgiving one, be good enough to overlook being overlooked. He thought back to every job he had taken because he couldn't afford to wait. Every late night shift, every missed rent payment, every time he swallowed the loneliness, because building a life for himself meant never asking for more than people were willing to give. He thought he had learned to live with being second choice, with being the quiet background in other people's victories. But something broke loose inside him that night, not with rage, but with a heavy, aching clarity. Luca didn't confront Jeremy at the festival. He didn't shout or demand or beg. Instead, he walked home under the same stars that had watched him grow up in a town too small for big dreams. He lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, realizing that the person he had trusted with his future hadn't just forgotten about him. Jeremy had decided that Luca's sacrifice was less important than his own ambitions, and had done so without shame. For the first time in a long while, Luca allowed himself to ask if he didn't stand up for his worth now. Then if he didn't draw the line between kindness and being used, how many more dreams would he let slip away in the name of loyalty? The realization didn't come with fireworks or dramatic declarations. It came quietly, like the slow shift of seasons, like the way rivers carve through stone without anyone noticing. Luca understood now. Forgiveness could not survive without respect. And somewhere along the way, Jeremy had decided that Luca's respect wasn't worth preserving. The decision did not come easily. Luca spent days replaying every memory of their friendship, every late-night phone call, every shared secret that once felt sacred. In the end, none of it changed the simple truth that had rooted itself in his chest. Silence would only feed the lie that he didn't matter. Late one evening, after another shift spent sweeping floors that would never be his own, Luca sat at the cracked kitchen table and composed a message. It was not angry, it was not emotional. It was precise. I need you to return the money. This isn't just about friendship anymore. It's about respect. He stared at the screen for a long time before pressing send, feeling as if he had just lit a match in a room full of old newspapers. Jeremy's response came quickly and hit harder than Luca expected. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of promises made, and instead Jeremy accused Luca of being dramatic, of making a big deal over a little favor between friends. He went further, suggesting that Luca was letting all that baggage get to him again, that being sensitive because of who you are was making Luca see betrayal where there was none. The words sliced through Luca more cruelly than any open rejection of his identity ever had, because they came from someone he had trusted, someone who had once sworn that being gay didn't make Luca any less worthy, any less real. Now it was being weaponized against him. The kindness he had offered, the loyalty he had given, all twisted into a flaw. To be mocked, the ripple effects were immediate. In the small circle of mutual friends, whispers began to rise. Luca was making trouble, airing dirty laundry, ruining years of friendship over money. He heard through the grapevine that Jeremy had painted himself as the victim, telling anyone who would listen that he had been planning to repay Luca all along, that it was Luca's insecurity that had poisoned everything. It would have been easier to fall back into old patterns, to stay silent, to shrink, to let the guilt gnaw at him until it erased the certainty he had so painfully built. But Luca was done living as the footnote in his own story. There was a different kind of strength in choosing dignity over approval. There was a different kind of power in accepting that some bridges were better burned than crossed on your knees. He sent a final message, brief, clear. Return the money by the end of the month. After that, I will pursue other channels. I hope it doesn't come to that. The days that followed were a study in discomfort. Friends who once invited him to weekend bonfires and birthday dinners now avoided eye contact at the grocery store. He caught snippets of conversations dying as he entered the coffee shop. It wasn't the loneliness that hurt. It was the realization of how fragile loyalty had always been, how little it took for people to choose comfort over truth. But even through the isolation, something unexpected began to bloom inside Luca. A fierce, unshakable clarity. He was not wrong to stand up. He was not wrong to demand to be seen fully. Not as an afterthought, not as a token friend, not as a symbol of someone else's open-mindedness. He was simply choosing himself for once without apology. The money returned to him in a plain envelope stuffed carelessly under his apartment door. One rainy afternoon. No note, no explanation, just a cold transaction where a friendship used to live. Luca stood there for a long time holding the envelope in his hand, rain dripping from the edge of his jacket, breathing in the bittersweet taste of freedom. He was poorer in friends than he had been months ago, but somehow he had never felt richer in spirit. In the quiet that followed the unraveling of old ties, Luca found himself standing at a crossroads no one had marked on a map. There were no congratulations for choosing self-respect over silence, no parades for refusing to be diminished, only the simple, unfamiliar stillness of a life unbound from the weight of other people's expectations. With the money back in his possession, he faced another choice, one far greater than just where to deposit him. It was the question that had lingered in every corner of his mind since the night he watched Jeremy walk away, with his dreams in his hands. Would he dare believe in himself again? The world had taught Luca early that dreams were luxuries meant for others, for people who fit neatly into the boxes the town had drawn. Masculine, predictable, ordinary. Luca had grown up knowing he would always be the exception, the soft-spoken boy whose laugh was too easy, whose eyes lingered too long on beauty. No one wanted him to name. He had spent years making himself smaller to survive. Now, for the first time, he wondered what might happen if he stopped shrinking. He stumbled across the flyer by accident, pinned to a bulletin board at the back of the local library. Small business grant for LGBTQ+ entrepreneurs. A single sheet of paper wrinkled at the edges, fluttering against the corkboard like it was waiting for him. He almost walked away, almost told himself it was for people braver, louder, stronger than he was, but something stubborn, something he thought he had buried under years of compromise, made him reach out and tear the flyer from the wall. The application wasn't complicated, but every question felt like a dare. What makes your business different? What impact will it have on your community? While Luca sat at his kitchen table for hours, the cursor blinking against the screen like a heartbeat. Finally, with trembling fingers, he wrote the truth. He wrote about growing up invisible. He wrote about wanting to create a place where no one had to apologize for who they were or who they loved. He wrote about flowers, wild, unruly, unapologetic blooming where no one thought they could. Weeks passed with no word. Luca threw himself back into his job, saving every extra dollar, dreaming carefully, cautiously. Then one afternoon, an email landed in his inbox. Congratulations, you've been selected. The grant wasn't huge, but it was enough. Enough to rent a narrow storefront on the corner of a forgotten street, enough to buy secondhand shelving, faded but sturdy, enough to fill the space with color and scent and life. He named it Wild Bloom because he understood now that survival wasn't enough. Living, thriving, flourishing in full view. That was the quietest, fiercest rebellion. Opening day came with little fanfare. A few curious neighbors poked their heads in, drawn by the strange sight of a shop that smelled of hope. In a town that had long since given up on new beginnings, Luca stood behind the battered counter, hands shaking slightly, wondering if he had made a mistake, if he had dared too much. Then a young woman stepped inside, clutching a crumpled $20 bill and a handful of questions about wedding arrangements. She smiled at Luca, not with suspicion, but with trust. Like she saw not a label, not a stereotype, but simply a man who loved beauty and wanted to share it. More people followed, some curious, some cautious, a few carrying the old town prejudices like armor. Luca welcomed them all the same, with quiet confidence, with dignity, with the knowledge that he owed no one an apology for who he was or how far he had come. Each bouquet he wrapped felt like a small victory, each arrangement placed in shaking hands, a reminder that even in the harshest soil, something tender could still take root. The friendships he lost were replaced slowly by connections built on something sturdier than convenience, mutual respect, genuine recognition. People who didn't need Luca to shrink in order to stay. There were still days when doubt crept in, when he wondered if he had been foolish to think he could rewrite the story. Life had once written for him, but those days grew fewer. The shop, once empty and echoing, now breathed with color and laughter and the quiet resilience of a man who had learned that flourishing wasn't something he had to apologize for. The first anniversary of Wild Bloom passed quietly. Luca marked the day by unlocking the shop earlier than usual, breathing in the fresh scent of lilies and freesias that filled the small space. There were no banners, no crowds, just a steady stream of customers who had piece by piece become something that felt like home. He spent the evening alone, sitting at the back of the shop with a cup of lukewarm tea, scrolling mindlessly through his phone. Somewhere between a video of a dog chasing its tail and a news article about a distant wildfire, He stumbled onto a post from the group of friends he had once called family. There they were all together, posing at the local diner, arms slung over shoulders, wide smiles beaming at the camera. The caption read simply, "Some bonds never break, friends forever." Luca stared at the photo for a long time, searching his own heart for bitterness and finding surprisingly none. Once that image would have felt like a dagger, a reminder of everything he had lost by standing up for himself. Now it looked like what it was, a chapter closed, a book already finished. He set the phone down, ready to let it go, when another message buzzed onto his screen. This one from Mason, a quieter voice from the old group, someone who had never taken sides publicly, but had never turned fully away either. "Thought you should know," the message began. "Jeremy borrowed a big chunk of money from Ryan's seed. It was for a new business idea. Never paid it back. Ryan lost his apartment deposit because of it. Things are getting messy." Luca leaned back against the worn wall, letting the words sink in. There was no satisfaction in hearing it, no triumph in being proven right, only a deep, aching sadness for the patterns that never broke when no one dared to confront them. He could almost see the timeline stretching out, promises made, trust given trust, broken, a circle repeating itself because no one had learned what Luca had. That loyalty demanded accountability, not blind forgiveness. For a fleeting moment, Luca imagined stepping in, speaking up, warning them all the way. He had once warned himself, but he knew it was not his battle to fight anymore. He had already chosen his path, and it did not wind back to places where he had to beg to be valued. He locked up the shop that night with a steadiness he hadn't known a year ago. The bouquet orders stacked neatly by the register, a handwritten thank you note from a newlywed couple pinned to the corkboard behind him. The quiet hum of a life he had built with bare hands and stubborn hope outside the town was falling asleep, unaware of the small, quiet revolutions happening behind every closed door. For Luca, the victory wasn't in watching someone else stumble. It was in knowing he had chosen differently. It was in knowing that choosing respect for himself had not been a loss, but a liberation. Some lessons come wrapped in betrayal. Some freedoms are born in the silence, after the door closes behind you. And sometimes walking away isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of it. Love for the self you fought so hard to save. Have you ever felt stronger for choosing yourself, even when it meant walking away? At HeartStories, we believe every goodbye to the wrong people is a hello to the life you deserve. If Luca's journey touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us. There's always more story to tell and more healing to find.